You're not lazy. You just quit when it gets quiet. Not when it's hard, not when life pushes back, but when nobody is watching and nothing seems to be happening. That's where you lose. Not in the moment of failure, but in the moment of silence. Because silence is uncomfortable. There's no feedback, no validation, no proof that what you're doing even matters. And if you're being honest, that's exactly where you've walked away before. You had the plan, the vision, that version of yourself you kept replaying in your head. More disciplined, more focused, more in control. You told yourself, this time, I'm serious. And for a while, you were. You started strong. Maybe you woke up early. Maybe you worked out. Maybe you actually did the thing you've been putting off. For a few days, maybe a week. Then something changed. The excitement faded. The results didn't show up. The effort started to feel heavier than it should, and the silence got louder. No one noticed your effort. No one praised your consistency. Nothing in your life looked different yet. So you slowed down. You skipped a day, then another. And just like that, you disappeared. Not publicly, not dramatically, quietly. And here's the truth most people will never admit. That's how they lose. Not because they couldn't do it, but because they didn't stay long enough to see it work. There was a time when someone close to me lived in that exact cycle. He talked about change like it was already his. Set goals, made plans, promised himself he was done starting over. But when it came down to doing the work, alone, without recognition, he folded. One night, he sat in his car outside the gym, engine running, hands on the wheel, eyes locked on the entrance. He knew exactly what he needed to do. He knew walking in could change something, maybe not everything, but something, and still, he didn't move. Minutes passed. The voice in his head got louder. You'll start tomorrow. You're tired. It doesn't matter tonight. So he drove home, and nothing about that moment felt dramatic. No breakdown, no failure speech, no realization, just another quiet decision to delay. And that's exactly how most dreams disappear, not in a single moment, but in small, repeated decisions to wait, until waiting becomes a habit, until quitting feels normal, until the version of you that once felt possible starts to feel unrealistic. But something changed, not in a big cinematic breakthrough, just a different choice. The next night, he showed up. No music, no motivation, no audience, just work. It wasn't impressive. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. And then he did it again and again and again. No one noticed. No one cared. But something was building, because discipline doesn't need attention. It needs repetition. And this is what most people never understand. Discipline isn't about intensity. It's about staying. Staying when it's boring. Staying when it's uncomfortable. Staying when there's no proof it's working. Because if you can stay in the dark long enough, you won't just change your habits. You'll change your identity. You'll become the person who doesn't leave. And when that happens, results stop being optional. They become inevitable. So if this message feels uncomfortably familiar, if you see yourself somewhere in this story, don't ignore it. And more importantly, don't keep it to yourself. Think of someone in your life who's stuck in that same cycle and share this with them. Because this might be the moment that helps them finally break it. Chapter 1. You quit in the dark. 10/10 version. This is the exact moment you've been losing your entire life. Not when things fall apart. Not when you hit rock bottom, but right here. When nothing is happening, when there's no feedback, no reward, no sign that anything you're doing is working, that's the moment you've been walking away from, and you don't even notice it. Because it doesn't feel like failure. It feels reasonable. You tell yourself, I'll do it tomorrow. I just need a reset. I'm tired today. And just like that, you step out of the version of your life that could have changed everything. Quietly, let me show you what this looks like in real life. A former colleague of mine, Jason, lived in that cycle for years. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. He had a stable job. He wasn't struggling financially. He showed up every day, did what he had to do. But every few months, he would try to reinvent himself. New routine, new goals, new energy. This time I'm serious, he'd say. And for a while, it looked real. He'd wake up early, go to the gym after work, cut out distractions, start learning new skills, 3 days, 5 days, maybe 10. Then something shifted, not dramatically. Just enough. He'd stay up late one night, skip a workout, miss one session, nothing that looked like failure. But everything that leads to it. And here's where most people get it wrong. They think discipline breaks when things get hard. It doesn't. It breaks when things get quiet, when the excitement fades, when progress disappears, when effort feels like it's going nowhere. That's when the real test begins, and almost nobody is prepared for it. I remember one night that made everything clear. We had worked late, and the parking lot was almost empty. I asked him a simple question. Why do you think it keeps happening? He didn't answer right away, just stood there, staring at nothing. Then he said something I've never forgotten. It's not when it's hard that I quit. A pause. It's when it stops feeling like anything. That was it. Not pain, not pressure, absence. And here's the truth most people never realize. Your brain is not built for that kind of silence. Behavioral psychology shows that when actions don't produce visible results, consistency drops fast. Your brain starts to resist, not because you're weak, but because it's trying to protect your energy. No reward equals no reinforcement. So it starts negotiating. Skip today. Try something else. Maybe this isn't working. And if you listen long enough, you stop. Jason didn't quit because he lacked discipline. He quit because he misunderstood what discipline actually feels like. He thought it would feel like progress, like momentum, like certainty. But real discipline doesn't feel like that. Most of the time, it feels like nothing. No excitement, no clarity, no emotional payoff, just repetition. And here's the twist that changes everything. The thing that makes discipline effective is the same thing that makes it unbearable. It doesn't reward you right away, which means if you're waiting to feel something before you continue, you will always quit. Jason repeated that cycle for years until something shifted. Not in a big moment, not in a dramatic realization, just a decision he stopped reopening. He didn't try harder. He removed the option to stop. Same wake-up time, same routine, same actions, whether he felt like it or not. No hype, no motivation, just structure. At first, nothing changed. Same results, same silence. But something inside him was different. He stopped asking himself, do I feel like doing this? And that changed everything. Because every time you ask that question, you give yourself a way out. And in the dark, you will take it. A few weeks later, I noticed something. Not a transformation, but a shift. He was calmer, more focused, less reactive. He wasn't fighting himself anymore. And that's when it clicked. Discipline isn't about pushing harder. It's about removing the conversation that lets you quit. Because you don't need more information. You already know what to do. Wake up, show up, do the work. Repeat. The problem is, you keep renegotiating the decision, and every time you do, your future becomes optional again. Jason didn't change because he found a better strategy. He changed because he made quitting harder than continuing. He closed the exit, and once there was no way out, there was only one direction left: forward. That's what it means to train discipline in the dark. Not becoming perfect, not becoming extreme, just becoming someone who stays, even when it's quiet, even when it feels pointless, even when nothing is telling you to keep going. Because that silence you're afraid of, that's not where progress disappears, that's where it's being built. And if you can stay there just a little longer than before, you won't just change what you do. You'll change who you are into someone who doesn't leave when it gets quiet. Chapter 2. Motivation is the trap. Let me be brutally honest with you. If you're still waiting to feel motivated before you act, you've already lost more time than you realize. Because motivation is not the thing that's been missing. It's the thing that's been misleading you. It feels powerful in the moment. It gives you that surge, that clarity, that sense that this time is different. You watch something inspiring. You hear the right words. You feel that shift inside you. And for a few hours, maybe even a few days, you become someone else. Focused, driven, ready. But then it fades, and you don't understand why, so you go looking for it again. Another video, another speech, another moment to restart, and without realizing it, you've built a cycle, not of progress, but of emotional dependency. I've seen this up close with someone I used to work with, Emily. She wasn't lazy, not even close. She was one of the most driven people I knew. In short bursts. Every few weeks, she'd come in with a new plan, a structured routine, clear goals, a fresh sense of urgency. "This time I figured it out," she'd say. And honestly, it looked convincing. She'd show up early, block her calendar, cut out distractions. For a while, everything aligned. Then something subtle would happen. Nothing went wrong. That's the key. There was no failure, no breakdown, no crisis. Just a gradual drop in intensity. She'd skip one planned session, push something to later, start making small exceptions. And here's where it gets interesting. She wouldn't say, "I'm quitting." She'd say, "I just don't feel it today." That phrase sounds harmless, almost responsible, like you're listening to yourself, but in reality, it's the exact mechanism that keeps you stuck. Because when your actions are tied to how you feel, consistency becomes impossible. And consistency is the only thing that ever builds anything real. There's a reason for this. Your brain is constantly trying to conserve energy. It prefers what's familiar, what's easy, what gives immediate reward. Motivation works because it temporarily overrides that system. It gives you a spike. A burst of dopamine that says, "This matters, do it now." But that spike doesn't last. And when it drops, your baseline takes over again. So if your entire system depends on that spike, you will always fall back. Not because you're weak, because you're relying on something unstable. Emily wasn't failing because she lacked discipline. She was failing because she built her habits on motivation, which means every action required a feeling first, and feelings are inconsistent. They change based on sleep, stress, environment, even the weather. So what happens on the days when you don't feel like it? Nothing. And those days add up. That's the trap. You think you're making progress because you keep starting. But you're not building anything that lasts. You're just repeating the same emotional loop. Excitement, action, drop-off. Again and again. Let me show you the shift that changed everything for her. It didn't come from a new strategy. It came from a realization. She told me one day, almost frustrated, "I'm tired of needing to feel ready." That sentence matters more than it sounds, because most people are still waiting for that feeling, the feeling that tells them now is the right time. But what if that feeling never comes? Or worse, what if it only shows up when it's convenient? That's when she made a decision. Not to try harder, but to remove motivation from the equation completely. She stopped asking, "Do I feel like doing this?" and replaced it with something simpler. "This is what I do." Same time, same place, same action, no debate, no emotional check-in. At first, it felt robotic, unnatural, almost forced. But something started to happen. She missed fewer days. She hesitated less. She wasted less time deciding. Not because she became more disciplined overnight, but because she removed the condition that was blocking her. She no longer needed motivation to begin. She just started. And over time, something interesting replaced motivation. Not excitement, not hype, but momentum. A quieter, more stable force. One that doesn't spike and doesn't crash. Because it's built on repetition, not emotion. That's when things actually started to change. Not instantly, but steadily. Her work improved. Her focus sharpened. Her confidence grew. Not from feeling good, but from showing up. That's the part most people misunderstand. They think motivation leads to action, but in reality, action creates the feeling you've been waiting for, not the other way around. You don't start because you feel ready. You feel ready because you started. And once that clicks, everything shifts. Because now you're not chasing a feeling. You're building a system, one that works on your worst days, one that doesn't ask for permission. One that keeps moving, even when you don't want to. That's how you escape the trap. Not by becoming more motivated, but by becoming less dependent on it. Because the truth is, motivation will always come and go. But if your actions stay the same, your results won't. And that's when you stop starting over and finally start moving forward. Chapter 3. The boring phase, where 90% quit. This is the part nobody posts about. No highlight, no transformation photo, no moment that looks impressive from the outside. Just repetition, quiet, uneventful, almost forgettable repetition. And this is where almost everyone quits. Not because it's hard, but because it's boring. Let me be clear about something most people don't want to hear. Boring is not a sign that something is wrong. Boring is the process working. But if you've been conditioned to expect excitement, to expect fast results, to expect some kind of emotional reward for your effort, this phase will break you because it gives you nothing. No validation, no momentum, no proof that what you're doing matters. Just the same actions, over and over again. And eventually, your mind starts asking questions. Why am I doing this? Is this even working? Maybe there's a better way. And that's where the danger begins, because once you start questioning the process, you start looking for something new, something faster, something more exciting, and just like that, you reset. Back to zero. I've seen this happen with someone I trained with for a while. Marcus. He was the kind of person who went all in. When he started something, he didn't play around. Strict routine, clean diet, focused work sessions. For the first few weeks, it looked incredible. Energy high, progress visible, confidence rising. And then, everything slowed down. The scale stopped moving. His strength plateaued. His routine felt heavier. Nothing was wrong. That's the part people misunderstand. Nothing had broken. He had just entered the boring phase, and you could see it in his face. Less excitement, more hesitation, more time spent thinking instead of doing. One day, after a workout that felt flat, he said something that sounded harmless. "I think my body's getting used to this. I might need to switch it up." That's how it starts. Not quitting, just adjusting, looking for something new. But underneath that thought was something deeper. Discomfort with repetition. He didn't want to feel stuck. He didn't want to feel like he was doing the same thing without results. So he changed the plan. New program, different routine, fresh start, and for a while, it felt good again. New equals exciting. Exciting feels like progress. But it wasn't. It was escape. A few weeks later, he hit the same wall, and the cycle repeated. Because the problem wasn't the plan, it was his inability to stay when things stopped feeling rewarding. And this is where most people get trapped for years. They keep restarting, thinking they're improving. But they're not staying long enough to actually build anything. Let me simplify this in a way that might shift how you see your own progress. There are two phases to any meaningful change: the visible phase and the invisible phase. The visible phase is what people chase. That's where results show up. That's where things feel exciting. That's where you get feedback. But the invisible phase, that's where everything is being built. Quietly, slowly, without any confirmation. And if you can't stay there, you will never reach the visible part. That's the trade-off nobody talks about. You don't earn results by intensity. You earn them by staying through the part that gives you nothing. Marcus didn't fail because he lacked effort. He failed because he kept escaping the invisible phase. He was addicted to progress, but not committed to the process. And those are two very different things. Progress feels good. The process often doesn't. There were days when he showed up and everything felt off. No strength, no energy, no motivation. And instead of seeing that as part of the journey, he saw it as a signal to change direction. But what if those days weren't a problem? What if those days were the point? Because here's the truth most people avoid. Consistency is only proven when it's inconvenient. Anyone can show up when it feels good. Anyone can stay consistent when results are visible. But when it's repetitive, when it's slow, when it feels like nothing is happening, that's when you find out who you actually are. This is where identity is built. Not in moments of intensity, but in moments of monotony. The days where you don't want to be there, the days where nothing is pushing you forward, the days where quitting would be easy and invisible. That's where discipline becomes real. Not as an idea, but as a decision you keep making, without needing a reason. And here's the part that changes everything if you really understand it. The boring phase is not where progress stops. It's where progress compounds. It just doesn't look like it yet. Your brain adapts. Your habits solidify. Your resistance decreases, all under the surface. And then one day, something shifts. Not dramatically, but noticeably. You feel stronger, more focused, more stable. Not because you changed something, but because you stayed long enough for the process to work. Marcus never reached that point. Not because he couldn't, but because he kept leaving right before it happened. And if you're being honest, you've probably done the same. Started something, made progress, hit a plateau, then walked away, thinking it wasn't working, when in reality, you were closer than you thought. That's the danger of the boring phase. It hides your progress from you. It makes you feel stuck when you're actually building momentum. And if you don't understand that, you'll keep quitting at the exact moment you should be continuing. So the question isn't whether your plan is perfect. It's whether you can stay when it stops feeling rewarding. Because if you can, you separate yourself from almost everyone. Not by doing more, but by leaving less. And in a world where most people keep restarting, the one who stays wins every time. Chapter 4. You quit because it gets quiet. There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels heavy, not loud enough to scare you, not obvious enough to alarm you, but just enough to make you question everything. This is where self-doubt lives, not in chaos, not in failure, but in the quiet moments where nothing is happening and no one is there to tell you you're on the right path. And if you stay in that silence long enough without understanding it, It will start rewriting the way you see yourself. At first, it's subtle. You show up. You do the work. You follow through on what you said you would do. But there's no response, no results, no feedback, no external proof that you're moving forward, and your mind starts filling in the blanks. Maybe this isn't working. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I started too late. These thoughts don't hit you all at once. They creep in, quietly, repeatedly, consistently, and over time, they start to feel like truth. Let me explain why that happens. Your brain is wired to look for certainty. It wants signals, progress markers, something it can use to confirm that your effort has meaning. When those signals don't show up, it doesn't stay neutral. It creates its own narrative. And most of the time, that narrative is negative. Not because you're broken, but because uncertainty feels unsafe. So your brain tries to protect you by pulling you back, by making you question the path, by suggesting that stopping might be the smarter move. That's the psychological trap. You think you're making a logical decision, but you're reacting to discomfort. And the longer you stay in that state, the more convincing it becomes. I remember a period in my own life where everything felt exactly like this. I was showing up every day, doing the work, following a routine that I believed in, but nothing was changing. No visible results, no feedback from anyone, no sense of momentum. Just silence. And I started to feel it. Not physically, mentally. That slow shift from confidence to doubt, from clarity to hesitation. I would sit down to work, and instead of starting, I'd think, overanalyze, second guess, question whether any of it was worth continuing. And here's the part that's hard to admit. I wasn't tired. I wasn't overwhelmed. I was uncertain. And uncertainty, if you don't understand it, can feel exactly like a sign to stop. That's where most people leave, not because they failed, but because they couldn't handle the absence of reassurance. And here's the truth most people never hear. Silence is not the absence of progress. Silence is where progress hides, but you have to stay long enough to see it. Because what's happening in that phase is internal. Your brain is adapting, your habits are stabilizing, your identity is shifting, but none of that is visible yet. So instead of feeling like growth, it feels like nothing. And that nothing becomes dangerous because your mind interprets it as stagnation. So you start looking for signals, checking for results, comparing yourself to others, looking for proof that you're not wasting your time. And when you don't find it, the doubt gets louder. Other people are moving faster. They're getting results. I'm still here. And just like that, the silence turns into pressure, and pressure turns into retreat. You don't quit dramatically. You don't make a big decision. You just start pulling back. A little less effort, a little less focus, a little more distraction, until eventually you're gone. Not because you made a choice, but because you stopped holding your ground. Let me be very clear about something. This is the phase that separates people more than anything else. Not talent, not intelligence, not opportunity, but the ability to stay when nothing is telling you to continue. Because in that silence, you're not just fighting the work, you're fighting your own mind, and your mind is convincing. It sounds reasonable, it sounds logical, it sounds like you. That's what makes it dangerous. So the question becomes, how do you stay? Not by forcing yourself harder, not by trying to feel more confident, but by changing how you interpret the silence. Instead of seeing it as a problem, you learn to recognize it as a phase, a necessary one, a predictable one, a sign that you've moved past the beginner stage and into something deeper. Because beginners get feedback, early progress is visible. But real growth, that happens after that. When things slow down, when the excitement disappears, when all you're left with is the process. And if you can stay there, if you can sit in that silence without needing it to tell you anything, you gain something most people never develop. Trust in yourself. Not based on results, not based on validation, but based on repetition. You stop asking, "Is this working?" and start saying, "This is what I do." And that shift changes everything. Because now the silence doesn't control you. It doesn't shake you. It doesn't make you question your direction. It becomes part of the path. Something expected. Something neutral. Something you move through instead of reacting to. And once you reach that point, self-doubt doesn't disappear, but it loses its power because you stop listening to it, not by ignoring it, but by outworking it, quietly, consistently, without needing proof. That's what it means to stay when it gets quiet. Not being fearless, not being perfect, just being steady. And in a world where most people walk away the moment they stop hearing something back, the one who stays in the silence becomes unstoppable. Chapter 5. You don't need more time. You need fewer excuses. Everyone says they don't have enough time. It sounds valid. Responsible even. I'm busy. I've got a lot going on. I'll start when things calm down. But if you look closer, it's not time that's missing. It's clarity. Because people who say they don't have time somehow still find hours to scroll, to watch, to delay. Not because they're lazy, but because they're avoiding something. And most of the time, it's not the work itself, it's the discomfort that comes with it. Let me show you what that looks like. A friend of mine, Daniel, used to say this all the time. "I just need more time." He worked a full-time job, long hours, commute, responsibilities. On paper, it made sense. He wasn't lying. But there was something about it that didn't sit right. Because every night after work, he would sit on his couch, phone in hand, telling himself he was too tired to do anything meaningful. 30 minutes would pass, then an hour, then 2, and at the end of it, he'd feel worse. Not rested, not recharged, just guilty, like he had wasted the only window he had. One night I asked him a simple question, not to challenge him, just to understand. If I gave you an extra 2 hours every day, what would you actually do with it? He didn't answer right away. He thought about it. Then he said something honest. I'd probably waste that too. That's when everything shifted. Because the problem wasn't time, it was what he did when he had it. And more importantly, what he avoided. Here's the part most people don't want to admit. We don't avoid things because we're busy. We avoid things because they make us uncomfortable. Starting feels heavy. Focusing feels hard. Trying and not seeing results feels frustrating. So instead of facing that, we tell ourselves a better story. I don't have time. It sounds cleaner, less personal, less confrontational, but it keeps you stuck because you can't fix a problem you're not willing to name. Daniel didn't need more time. He needed to stop escaping the moments he already had. So we tried something simple, not a new routine, not a complex system. Just one rule, no phone for the first hour after he got home. That's it. No productivity apps. No pressure to do something amazing. Just remove the easiest escape. The first few days were uncomfortable. He didn't know what to do with himself. He'd sit there, restless, almost irritated, because without distraction, everything he had been avoiding was right there. The work, the ideas, the things he kept saying he wanted to do. And for the first time, he had no excuse not to start. So he did. Not perfectly, not for long, but he began. 20 minutes one night, 30 the next, Some days, he barely made progress, but he showed up, and something changed. Not in his schedule, but in his relationship with time. He stopped seeing it as something he lacked, and started seeing it as something he was wasting. That shift matters more than it sounds, because once you realize you already have enough time, the excuses don't work anymore. And that's uncomfortable, because now it's on you. There's a concept that explains this better than most people realize. We don't manage time, we manage attention. Time is fixed. Everyone gets the same 24 hours. But attention? That's where the difference is. What you focus on, what you give your energy to, what you choose to engage with, that determines everything. And most people don't lose time. They leak attention into things that are easy, things that are immediate, things that don't demand anything from them. And by the time they're done, there's nothing left for what actually matters. That's why you feel like you don't have time, because you've already spent your focus somewhere else. Daniel didn't need a better schedule. He needed to protect his attention, and once he did, everything started to move, not fast, but consistently. He made progress on things he had been putting off for months. He felt more in control, less reactive, not because he had more hours in the day, but because he stopped giving them away. And here's the twist most people miss. You don't need more discipline to manage your time. You need fewer escapes. Because every distraction you allow is a decision not to move forward, and those decisions stack up, quietly, daily, repeatedly, until weeks go by and nothing has changed. Not because you didn't have time, but because you didn't protect it. So the question isn't, do you have enough time? It's, what are you doing with the time you already have? Because if you're honest, there are moments in your day, small windows, where you could start, not for hours, not perfectly, just enough to move forward. And those moments matter more than you think, because progress doesn't come from big blocks of time. It comes from consistent use of small ones. That's how momentum is built, not in bursts, but in decisions. Daily, often invisible decisions. To use your time instead of escaping it. Daniel didn't become a different person overnight. He didn't suddenly become hyperproductive. He just stopped lying to himself about what was actually holding him back. And once that happened, he didn't need more time anymore. He just needed to use it. And so do you. Chapter 6. You're not overwhelmed. You're avoiding one thing. Let's strip this down to something uncomfortable. You're not overwhelmed because you have too much to do. You're overwhelmed because there's one thing you don't want to face, and it's sitting there, quietly, patiently, waiting. You feel it the moment you think about starting your day, that slight tension. That hesitation you can't fully explain. So you do something else. You check your messages. Open another tab. Tidy up something that doesn't matter. Not because it's important, but because it's easier. And suddenly, your day fills up. Emails, small tasks, things that make you feel productive without actually moving anything forward. By the end of it, you're exhausted, and it feels justified. I did a lot today. But if you're honest, you didn't do the thing that matters most. That's not overwhelm, that's avoidance. Let me show you how subtle this can be. A former client of mine, Lena, was one of the most busy people I've ever worked with. Her calendar was packed. Back-to-back meetings, constant notifications, endless to-do lists. If you looked at her day, you'd think she was doing everything right, but nothing in her life was actually moving forward. The project she cared about, delayed. The career shift she talked about, still just an idea. The work that could change her trajectory, always next week. And every time we talked, she'd say the same thing. I'm just overwhelmed. At first, it made sense. She had a lot going on, But after watching her closely, something didn't add up. Because the more overwhelmed she felt, the more she avoided one specific task, the one thing she never touched. One day, I asked her to do something simple, not a new system, not a complicated plan. Just this. Tell me the one thing you've been avoiding the longest. She didn't hesitate. She knew. A presentation she had to build. Not just any presentation. This one mattered. It could lead to a promotion. It could shift how people saw her. It could put her in a position she wasn't sure she was ready for. And that's where the real issue was. It wasn't the work. It was what the work represented. Expectation, visibility, risk. Because once she did it, there was no hiding anymore. People would see her at a higher level, and that's terrifying when you're not sure you belong there yet. So instead of facing that discomfort, she stayed busy. Safe tasks, low-risk work, things she knew she could handle. And the more she avoided the real thing, the more overwhelmed she felt because it never left. It just sat in the background, unfinished, unresolved, taking up mental space. That's what avoidance does. It doesn't remove the problem, it multiplies it. One task becomes 10, not in reality, but in your head. Because every time you don't do it, it becomes heavier, more intimidating, more difficult to start, until eventually it feels impossible. So you keep avoiding it, and the cycle continues. Here's the twist most people don't see. You're not overwhelmed by everything. You're overwhelmed by one thing you keep postponing, and everything else is just noise around it. Once Lena saw that clearly, everything changed. Not instantly, but honestly. She stopped pretending she didn't know what the issue was, and we made one decision. Every morning, before anything else, she would work on that one task. No email, no meetings, no distractions, just that. The first day was rough. She sat there for 10 minutes, doing nothing. Not because she didn't know what to do, but because starting felt heavy, uncomfortable, exposed. But she stayed. Eventually, she began. Slowly, imperfectly. But she moved. The next day, it was slightly easier. Not easy, but easier. And something interesting started to happen. The rest of her day felt lighter. Not because she had less to do, but because the weight was gone. That one task, the one she had been carrying for weeks, was no longer sitting in the background. And once that pressure disappeared, everything else became manageable. That's when it clicked for her. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was avoiding something that mattered, and that avoidance was draining more energy than the work itself ever could. This is where most people get it wrong. They try to fix overwhelm by organizing more, planning better, optimizing their schedule. But none of that works if you're still avoiding the real thing. Because no system can compensate for avoidance. You can have the perfect plan and still not execute. Because execution isn't about clarity. It's about confrontation, facing the one thing you've been putting off, the thing that makes you uncomfortable, the thing that might not go perfectly, the thing that could expose you. That's where progress lives. Not in everything you're doing, but in the one thing you keep delaying. So here's a question you need to answer honestly. What's the one thing you've been avoiding that you know would actually move your life forward? Not 10 things, not your entire list, just one. Because if you can face that, everything else starts to fall into place. Not magically, but naturally. Your mind clears, your focus sharpens, your energy returns. Not because you did more, but because you stopped carrying something unfinished. Lena didn't become more productive. She became more honest. She stopped hiding behind busyness and started confronting what mattered. And once she did, she didn't feel overwhelmed anymore. She felt in control. Because control doesn't come from doing everything. It comes from doing what matters most. First, every time. Chapter 7. You don't lack confidence. You lack evidence. Most people think confidence comes first, that you need to believe in yourself before you act, that you need to feel ready before you step into something bigger. But if that were true, you'd already be there. Because you've tried that, you've waited for the feeling. You've told yourself you just need more clarity, more certainty, more belief. And it never fully arrives. Not in a way that lasts. Because confidence doesn't come from thinking. It comes from evidence. And if you don't have proof, your brain won't buy in. Let me explain this in a way that might change how you see yourself. A guy I used to know, Chris, struggled with this more than anyone I've seen. Smart, capable, hardworking, but he constantly held himself back. In meetings, he'd stay quiet. When opportunities came up, he'd hesitate. When it was time to step forward, he'd pull back. And every time, it sounded the same. I'm just not confident enough yet. At first, it made sense. Confidence feels like something you either have or don't. But after watching him for a while, I realized something was off. Because Chris wasn't lacking ability. He was lacking proof. He had never given himself enough real experiences to build trust in his own capability. So instead, he relied on thoughts. And thoughts aren't stable. They shift based on mood, environment, comparison. One good day, you feel capable. One bad moment, you question everything. That's not confidence. That's guessing. One day we were working on a small internal project together. Nothing high stakes, no audience, no pressure. At least, that's how I saw it. But for him, it was different. He kept delaying one specific part of the project, presenting his ideas, not to a big room, just to a small team. Still, he hesitated. Reworked slides, tweaked wording, pushed the moment further out. Finally, I asked him directly, "What are you actually waiting for?" He didn't say time. He didn't say clarity. He said, "I just want to feel more confident before I do it." And that's where everything flipped. Because that sentence sounds logical, but it's completely backwards. Confidence doesn't come before action. It comes after evidence. And you don't get evidence by waiting. You get it by doing. Even when you're unsure, even when it's messy, even when it doesn't go perfectly. Chris didn't need more confidence, he needed more reps. So we made a small adjustment. Nothing dramatic. No big mindset shift. Just this. He would present before he felt ready. Not once. Repeatedly. The first time wasn't great. He stumbled over a few words, lost his train of thought at one point, looked uncomfortable. But something important happened. Nothing bad. No one judged him. No one shut him down. In fact, people listened, gave feedback, asked questions, treated him like he belonged there. That moment mattered more than any motivational thought he had ever had, because it gave him something real, evidence. Not that he was perfect, but that he was capable. And that's all confidence needs to start building. The next time, he was still nervous, but less. Not because he convinced himself to feel better, but because he had a reference point. I've done this before, and I survived. That's how it starts. Not with belief, but with proof. And over time, those small pieces of evidence stack. You speak up once, then again, then again. You take a risk, it doesn't destroy you. You try something new, you figure it out, and slowly, your internal narrative shifts. Not from, "I hope I can do this," but from, "I've handled things like this before." That's confidence, not loud, not exaggerated, just grounded, built on experience. Here's the twist most people miss. Confidence is not a personality trait. It's a memory, a collection of past actions that your brain uses to predict future outcomes. If your memory is empty or filled with avoidance, your brain has nothing to work with. So it defaults to doubt, not because you're incapable, but because you haven't shown yourself enough. And that's where people get stuck. They wait to feel confident before they take the actions that would actually create it. And in doing that, they stay exactly where they are. Chris didn't change because he became fearless. He changed because he stopped requiring confidence to begin. He acted first, collected evidence, then let confidence catch up. And once that process started, it didn't take long. A few presentations later, he spoke more clearly. A few more, he started contributing ideas without being asked. Then one day, something shifted. He didn't hesitate. He just spoke, not because he felt amazing, but because it had become normal. That's the end goal most people misunderstand. Not feeling confident all the time, but becoming someone who acts, regardless of how they feel. Because once you reach that point, confidence is no longer something you chase. It's something that follows you, quietly, consistently, in the background. So if you've been telling yourself you need to build confidence before you move forward, flip it. Start building evidence, small actions, repeated consistently in the direction you've been avoiding. That's where it comes from. Not from thinking more, not from waiting longer, but from doing before you feel ready. Because the truth is, you're not lacking confidence. You're lacking proof. And the only way to get it is to start. Chapter 8. You don't rise to your goals. You fall to your systems. Most people set goals like promises. Clear, ambitious, motivating. I'll wake up earlier. I'll be more consistent. I'll finally become that version of myself. And for a while, it feels real. You write it down. You visualize it. You feel aligned with it. But then life happens. You get tired. Something unexpected comes up. Your mood shifts, and suddenly, that goal doesn't feel as strong anymore. So you adjust. I'll start tomorrow. I'll do it later. I just need to reset. And just like that, you're back where you started. Not because your goal wasn't clear, but because your system wasn't strong enough to carry it. Here's the truth most people don't want to hear. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. Because goals are moments. Systems are patterns. And patterns always win. Let me show you what that looks like in real life. A guy I used to train with, Ethan, was obsessed with setting goals. Every month he had a new one. Get in shape, improve his routine, build better habits. And every month, he started strong. Waking up early, training consistently, eating clean for about 2 weeks. Then something small would throw him off. A late night, a busy day, a missed session, nothing major. But it broke the rhythm. And instead of returning to the routine, he'd fall out completely. Skip one day, turned into skipping a week. Then he'd say, I just need to get back on track. And the cycle would repeat. New goal, strong start, drop off, again and again. One day, after watching this pattern for months, I asked him something simple. What happens the moment you miss a day? He didn't talk about his schedule. He didn't mention time. He said, it feels like I've already messed it up. So I just stop. That's the moment most people lose. Not when they fail, but when they interpret failure as the end. Because in his mind, the goal was perfection, and anything less than that felt like failure. So instead of continuing imperfectly, he restarted completely. And every restart reset his progress back to zero. That's when we changed one thing, not his goal, his system. We removed the idea of starting over. There was no reset, no perfect streak to protect. Just one rule: never miss twice. That's it. Miss a day? Fine. But the next day, you show up, no matter what, no negotiation. At first, it felt too simple, almost pointless. But that's exactly why it worked. Because it didn't rely on motivation. It didn't require perfection. It just created a structure that caught him when he slipped. And that's what systems are supposed to do. Not push you when you're strong, but hold you when you're weak. The first time he missed a workout, everything in him wanted to skip the next day too. That familiar voice, you already broke it. Just restart next week. It doesn't matter now. But this time, there was no restart, just the rule. So he showed up. Not with energy, not with excitement, just presence. And something shifted. Not physically, mentally. Because for the first time, he didn't let a mistake define his direction. He didn't fall out of the system. He stayed inside it. That moment matters more than people realize. Because success isn't built on perfect days. It's built on recovery. How quickly you return after you fall. That's what defines your trajectory. Not how hard you go when things are going well, but how you respond when they're not. Ethan didn't become more disciplined overnight. He became more consistent in how he handled imperfection, and that changed everything. Weeks went by, then months. Not perfect, but stable. And for the first time, he didn't feel like he was starting over. He felt like he was continuing. That's the difference systems create. They remove the emotional swings. They eliminate the need to feel ready. They give you something to fall back on when everything else feels uncertain. Here's the twist most people miss. Goals give you direction, but systems decide your outcome. Because you don't execute goals, you execute habits, daily actions, repeated patterns, things you do without thinking. So if your system is weak, no goal will save you. And if your system is strong, you don't need to rely on goals as much. Because your actions are already aligned with where you want to go. That's why some people look consistent without trying. They're not more motivated. They're just operating inside a system that supports them. And most people aren't. They're relying on willpower, on mood, on bursts of energy that come and go. And when those disappear, so does their progress. Ethan didn't need a better goal. He needed a system that didn't collapse the moment things weren't perfect. And once he had that, he didn't rise suddenly. He just stopped falling. And over time, that's what creates change. Not massive effort, but fewer breakdowns, fewer resets, fewer moments where you disappear completely. Because every time you stay, even imperfectly, you move forward. So stop asking yourself if your goals are big enough. Start asking, is my system strong enough to hold me on my worst days? Because those days are coming. They always do. And when they do, your system will decide everything. Not your intention, not your motivation, not your plan, just what you've built and whether it can carry you through. Because at the end of the day, you don't rise to your goals. You fall to your systems. And the ones who build systems that don't break are the ones who don't have to start over ever again. If you've made it this far, something in you is different now. Not louder, not more excited, but clearer. Because everything you've just heard isn't about motivation or quick change or becoming someone new overnight. It's about understanding why you've been stuck, even when you wanted to move forward. You've seen it from different angles. You don't quit when it's hard. You quit when it gets quiet. You don't need more motivation. You need to stop depending on it. The boring phase isn't failure. It's where progress is built. Silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means everything is happening internally. You don't need more time. You need fewer escapes. You're not overwhelmed. You're avoiding one thing that matters most. You don't lack confidence. You lack evidence. And you don't rise to your goals. You fall to your systems. That's the truth most people never take the time to understand. And now you have it. But here's the part that matters more than anything you've heard so far. None of this changes your life unless you use it. Not all at once, not perfectly, just practically. Because change doesn't come from watching, it comes from doing, especially when it's uncomfortable. So don't walk away from this thinking you need to fix everything. You don't. Start with one thing, one action you've been avoiding, one habit you know matters, one moment in your day where you usually disappear, and choose to stay instead. That's enough. Because what you're building isn't intensity, it's consistency. And consistency doesn't need big moves. It needs repeated ones. Quiet ones. The kind no one sees. The kind that feels small, but compound over time. That's how everything you want actually starts to take shape. Not in a breakthrough, but in a decision you repeat, even when nothing is pushing you to do it. And if you take anything from this video, let it be this. You don't need to become a different person. You just need to stop leaving. Stop leaving when it gets boring. Stop leaving when it gets quiet. Stop leaving when it feels uncertain. Because the version of you that you've been chasing is built by the version of you that stays. Even when it's hard, even when it's slow, even when it doesn't feel like it's working yet. That's where everything changes. And if you're still here right now, that already says something about you. It means you're paying attention. It means you're ready for something more than just another reset. So take this and use it. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today, even if it's small, even if it's imperfect. Just start and stay. And if this video connected with you, if you know someone who's stuck in that same cycle of starting and stopping, share this with them. Because sometimes the right message at the right moment is all it takes to change direction. I appreciate you being here, taking the time to watch this all the way through. And I'll see you in the next video.